You have been lost in the Himalayas for days. The thin, dry air and the bitter, relentless cold has sapped your strength, but you continue to force yourself to stagger onward. Your legs are shaking, and your feet and hands are utterly numb as you stumble over one more ridge. And as you do so, your face is hit with a blast of warm, wet air. You gasp in disbelief. Below you, you see a beautiful, vast mountain valley dotted with villages and farms. In the middle are two half-moon-shaped lakes, and between those two lakes is a wondrous city right out of fairy tales. And you realize you have found the hidden land of Shamhala. That's right, today we're covering the hidden kingdom of Shamhala of Hindu and Buddhist stories and legend. But first, hello, my name is Garvin and I read things and chatter on about them on the internet for your entertainment. With that said, let's turn to the kingdom of Shamhala. Shamhala first appears in the Vishnu Puranas. The Puranas are a set of Indian texts, and while the Puranas as a whole cover a vast array of topics, the Vishnu Puranas talk mainly about the Hindu god Vishnu, which does make a certain amount of sense given the name, right? Shamhala appears in a prophecy in those texts that in the depths of the darkness of the Kali Yuga, I'll explain what that is in a minute, Kalki, and I'll explain him as well, will be born in a village or city named Shamhala, and he will ascend to become king, putting an end to the darkness and leading humanity into a new golden age called the Satya Yuga. Now, I just threw a lot of terms at you, so let's go ahead and stop for a minute and define those terms. Let's start with Kalki. Now, Kalki is the promised avatar of the god Vishnu, and he's not the first one of these guys I've talked about on this channel. In the Mermaid series, I talked about the first avatar of Vishnu, and at least as far as I understand, the most popular avatar of Vishnu, Rama, and I even talked about Rama way back in the dim beginnings of this channel when I talked about kidnapping in fiction and mythology. These avatars are physical incarnations of Vishnu, who appear when everything is going wrong with the world and are here to do good and restore harmony. Now, according to the story, Kalki has not appeared yet, and he won't until things get really, really bad. Which leads me to the question of just what is the Kali Yuga and the Satya Yuga? So, the first thing you need to understand is the Hindu time is cyclical. It repeats over and over in a pattern. The yugas are these four really vast ages in that pattern. They repeat one after another. The Satya Yuga is the first and best age in that pattern. It's a golden age where everyone is honest and kind and does what they're supposed to do and never steals the last cookie. I'm not bitter. The Kali Yuga is the fourth and last age, and it's the most materialistic and the one most full of conflict and sin. Corruption is fairly widespread, as is war and greed, and the last slice of pizza will always go to the fastest and the greediest instead of the most hungry. Now, most of my sources say that we are currently living in the Kali Yuga, which I'm sure is not a surprise to many of you, and I wouldn't be surprised if a good portion of my audience nodded along when I said that. I do find some disagreement with that, with some sources claiming that we live in the Dvapara Yuga, the third age, which I'm not sure if that's comforting, because if those people are right, it means things are gonna get a lot worse before they get better. But no matter who you believe, everyone agrees that we do not live in the Golden Age, and none of us alive today will actually see that Golden Age, which is kind of unfortunate, isn't it? Now, moving forward to Buddhism, Shamhala has a much more involved story in Buddhist tradition. This story shows up in the Kalachakra texts, which are a part of Tibetan and Indian Buddhism, to just be specific here. In this story, Shamhala is a kingdom outside of India, usually to the north. And the king from Shamhala came down to India, met Buddha, and received the Kalachakra teachings from him, and brought them back to his country to teach everyone. For once, this worked out fairly well, and Shamhalla became a place of peace, prosperity, and joy. And at this point, they also started hiding themselves from the outside world, because being the lone representative of peace, prosperity, and joy usually doesn't work for the people involved. There is kind of a prophetic element to this story, because it says in the future, an army will arise bent on destroying all spiritual practices. Now, just to be clear, we're not talking about organized religion here. We're talking about any belief or practice that acknowledges anything outside of material, physical existence. And that could mean destroying holidays, that could mean denying people the right to practice, like, yoga, even. So, this would be a fairly intrusive force, and they would maraud across the world. The king of Shamhala at that point, not the same person who spoke to Buddha, but one of his descendants, would be ruling the nation under the name Kalki, and he would come forth leading an army of light to destroy these marauders, unite humanity, and, say it with me, lead us all into a golden age. This story also shows up, at least a comparable version of it, in the Bon scriptures, and the Bon is an indigenous religion to Tibet that heavily influenced Tibetan Buddhism. Today, it's a minority group within Tibet, and I'm not going to go too into the weeds on that, but I think we can see the common themes between these three stories, right? Now, according to the Buddhist and Hindu traditions I've found, the location of Shamhala is a bit hard to nail down, with some of them being rather vague as to the location. Some even saying that Shamhala is somewhere between the Gobi and the Himalayan mountains, which, that's a lot of space. There are also traditions of it being a hidden mountain valley, or not entirely a physical place, but a more spiritual state of being. And this gets even more confused when Europeans get involved. To give a fairly laid-back example, early Portuguese explorers came to believe that Shamhala was just another name for China. But don't worry, this is gonna get crazier. And almost as if that's a cue, we have showing up in this story someone I've spoken of before, Helena Blavatsky. And this is about the fifth if we count Mu, mythical lost land, where she's a part of the story. Sooner or later, I'm just going to have to do a video that talks about nothing but this one woman. Let me boil it down, though. She was a Russian aristocrat who adventured around the world, and at some point claimed to have snuck into Tibet and got into contact with hidden masters who enlightened her. Blavatsky focused on Shamhala as a spiritual place outside the physical realm, although some of her writings also mentioned it as a sacred island in what is now the Gobi Desert. One of her followers, Alice Bailey, wrote that Shamhala was actually in the astral plane, and the secret masters were communicating with them and Helena from the astral plane. Now, I want you to remember that these people are interested in Shamhala, because we're going to circle back to this. Another detail to remember here is that during this period, there was intense competition between Russia, China, and the British Empire for control and influence in Central Asia. To give an example of how strange this could get, there was a Russian advisor to the Dalai Lama, a man who had converted to Buddhism and became a monk, named Agven Dorjevez. He tried to pitch the idea that Russia would be the ideal protector of Tibet, and that Russia was in fact Shamhala, with Tsar Nicholas being the reincarnation of a great Buddhist master. I have friends who would hit the roof at the idea of the Tsar being enlightened in any respect, and I gotta agree, this is a heck of a stretch. This never really worked out, but not for lack of trying. I also want to talk about one more thing that's going to show how confused and kind of mixed up mythology can get when you have outside people getting involved, in this case Europeans. Now, some of you may have watched my Hollow Earth video, and you might have remembered that I mentioned Shamhala has an underground nation in stories. And you might have noticed in all the stories I've mentioned about Shamhala so far, none of them have put that nation under the ground. Well, it took me a bit of digging, but I found out why that was. So, before I get into this, keep in mind, this is happening over 100 years ago. Translation was a lot harder and easier to screw up back then, and a lot of the first translation dictionaries, especially for Central Asian languages, were just being written out. So a number of Europeans got the stories of Shamhalla and the stories of another lost land called Agartha mixed together. And this comes to a head after the Russian Revolution, when a Polish captain named Odosodowski, I'm going to put that name up in the comments because I'm pretty sure I killed it and I couldn't find a pronunciation guide. Anyways, this guy wrote a book called Beasts, Men, and Gods, where he details hearing across Central Asia stories about a figure known as the King of the World, who dwelled in an underground kingdom and would emerge one day to defend humanity against a great enemy and lead us into a golden age, which does make it feel like a mix of Shamhala and Agartha, doesn't it? And we haven't covered Agartha yet, but we will. Anyways, getting back to it, that kind of stands as a reminder, especially to me, to always double check sources, because sometimes a source can mislead you even when it's working in good faith. But it does look like the idea of Shamhala being underground was introduced by Europeans. I might find more information on that, and I will keep digging. Pun fully intended there. I mean my puns. But let's get back to the story here. Now, this is where the followers of Blavatsky come back in. Nicholas Roerich was a Russian-born artist, archaeologist, and one of Helena's followers, and he had moved to New York with his wife, also named Helena, I'm sure that won't get confusing, before the Russian Revolution. And after the Russian Revolution happened, they were in no hurry to go back. However, Helena, his wife, not Blavatsky, told him she was getting telepathic orders from the hidden masters that they needed to leave the States and head to Central Asia to search for Shamhala in the 1920s. And according to some sources, while looking for support and aid on this, they managed to get funding from Gleb Boki, the head of the Chechnya, the Soviet secret police. He believed in Shamhala, apparently, and was convinced that such a utopian society would of course be sympathetic to a communist government and would provide them powerful weapons. Now, the larger Soviet government was also looking for evidence of Shamhala, not because they believed it was a utopian society with powerful weapons, but they thought if they could find archaeological evidence of a Shambhalan-like kingdom, it would help them gain influence over Central Asia and create allies that they could use to protect their flanks, especially from the British and French empires. Gobi also wanted Roerich, by the way, to keep his eyes open and report on any British or French spies he found. So, he was trying to kill two birds with one stone here. Very thrifty. While the expedition was certainly productive and gathered a lot of interesting linguistic and archaeological information, they were also the first people to officially map out several mountain passes in Tibet. It's hard to say that it went well. The weather, the terrain, and bandit attacks were all constant hazards that they ran into repeatedly. They also disappeared for about a year, and we know that 5 months of those years they spent somewhere in the Tibetan prison system in one or another prison camp. After being released, they would make their way back to India, and on the way there they said they ran into a fellow Russian, who was a member of the Old Believers. The Old Believers are a Christian Orthodox sect who reject reforms made to the Orthodox Church in the 1600s, just FYI. And this man showed them a rock-covered cave and claimed that it was a passage to the underground realm of Shambhala where the people were waiting to re-emerge when the world needed them most. Which, you see how Europeans are bringing in this underground realm thing here. Gaboki, at least for his part, would continue with his attempts to try and find Shamhala and to merge Buddhism and communism into a single coherent ideology. He was known to be trying to find ways to use Buddhist spiritual techniques to create the perfect communist human, and he's accused of using tantric studies as a cover to hold orgies in his dacha. Ooh, wow. He attempted to create his own expedition into Tibet, but Soviet politics would derail him, and in 1937 he would be arrested and executed for conspiratorial activities. I don't have any evidence, but I assume somebody was upset over who he was inviting into his dacha. He would be posthumously rehabilitated in 1957. The important thing on that is that meant that his family could get pension and survivor benefits. Shambhala would have one more powerful effect on Western civilization. You see, British author James Hilton would use it as an inspiration for his novel Lost Horizons, printed in 1933, where he talked about a utopian Buddhist society hidden in a mountain valley named Shangri-La. What stands out to me are that there are two common threads going through all of these stories. And the first one is that there is a group of people out there who have finally figured it out. They have figured out how to live with one another and be happy and keep society running, and no one has to live with a boot on their face. And that's something I think we all want. There's also the idea that these people don't hate us. In fact, they wish us well, and if things truly get past our ability to solve, they will come and save us and help us get to a better place. And that is a powerfully comforting idea, and one that easily crosses cultural boundaries. So I can see why this story has persisted the way it has. It's on that note that I am going to end this week's video. I hope you found it informative, or at least entertaining. If you did, please leave a like, a comment, or consider subscribing, as all of that helps me in my eternal battle with the Dread Lord Algorithm. Terror be on his name. If you'd like to have a voice on future videos, join my Everwise patrons for $1 a month. That gets you a vote. Speaking of patrons, I'd like to thank my biggest supporter, Big Steve. Whichever yuga we're in, man, I hope it goes well for you. Next week, it's Halloween, so let's look at something just a bit spooky. We're going to look at the Isle of Demons. I hope you'll join me, but until then, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and of course, keep reading.